I'm Sheryl Schwyhart. I'm a 2020 alum of United and former staff member, and they still let me hang around. And this is my friend Doug Abbott. Doug is a
2010 alum, same program, Masters in Arts and Theology and Arts.
We met 10 years ago across the table at the lunchroom, didn't know one another. I was just new to United and was looking to volunteer. And we got to talking, and it was just an instant connection. And our friendship and theology and artwork has just continued to grow over the 10 years. And Doug says, let's do an exhibition together. And I said, sure, why not? I was having a mental moment at the time.
Now, see, I thought you suggested it.
No, it's your fault. And so when we were talking about what we were going to do, we liked the hard and soft metal and fabric idea together. And
I just want to throw in there that we were, because I think I was maybe just starting to work at United at that around that time,
yeah,
close that time. But Peg and Chuck Hoffman were there, and we were doing this meditative painting in a circle. And Donna, I think you were there. And so, you know, it's just this, because sometimes we had music and sometimes it's just silence and no speaking, and just doing, and you just would move around. And we had this, you know, huge paper and paints, and you just, as a collective art making. And then we started, you know, we hung a lot of exhibits together, and we found out that we made a really darn good team in getting it done. So whoever it was, me or you or God, that brought us to,
we'll blame it on him.
Okay. That we, you know, we knew that was our strength, that was a strength that we would be able to really rely on when we got to the hanging of the work. Thank you for letting me interject that.
Some years ago, I took the mystics class from Dr. Oz Freeman, and got introduced to Father William Hart McNichols, who is an iconographer. And so I got his book, the new one, when it came out. And Doug and I talk frequently, and a lot about how you navigate a day when you can't see a way, sort of. And when we watched the documentary on Father McNichols, he talked about his ritual of going into the studio and inviting the spirit of the person that he was writing into his space. Or maybe he would have a dream and he would know what he was supposed to do. And he said, and then sometimes there's nothing. And now what do you do when there's no muse, no voice, no spirit there? And it's taken, I don't know, 4 or 5 years to kind of find an answer to it. But in the book, he talks about having a vision, being obedient to it, and being open. And that just resonated with me, and I shared it with Doug, and that's sort of been, you know, our mantra. And we both believe it. I just didn't quite know how to put it into practice until this exhibition. And it's like, well, I believe this. Well, go do it. And so I gave it my best shot, and there've been so many surprises during the whole process over the last 3 months. Nothing has come out the way I thought it was going to. And it was a lesson I needed to learn about preconceived ideas of what something should be to be successful. It's not my decision.
And we've really been humbled, if I may, that we bring our work and we'd start trying, we did kind of in sections to do the progressive growing exhibit. And we'd come with like either what we thought was going to go up or what we wanted to go up. And pretty soon it's like, well, we were wrong. And then the pieces would just, like a conversation, just start to show us what was going to go up. And I don't think I haven't felt like we've just listened to the exhibition, which I think is a strength of our friendship, but also our studies here, in that our vision, we both were on board. I was telling her yesterday that neither one of us like got bent out of shape and went to our silos. Well, you do this and I'm going to do this over here. And, that kind of conflict that can come, that sometimes happens with an ego of artists, and we do have them, and it can really muck up a exhibition, and that was not present at all.
Doug lives in Mankato. I live in the cities. I had seen some of the crosses that he had made some time ago. And so I kind of knew what he was doing, but I didn't see his work. He didn't see mine. And I had some that I had made some years ago that I drug out of the closet. And I thought, well, okay, I want to use this. I want to use this. I want to use this. Oh, this is, no, not ever. And this, yeah, no, not ever. And so I'm showing Doug what I've chosen to go in. And he said, well, what about those? I like those. And I said, those are the no, not ever. And he said, I really like them. And okay. I said, we'll let Jennifer look at them and see, because I knew she was going to agree with me. So I brought them in and I laid out an array of pieces. And I said, what do you think about, what should we choose for this wall? And she chose both of the no, not ever. It's like 2-1. Okay, I give up. And so the two that I thought for sure were the ones going up were absolutely not the ones to go up. The crosses he thought would go up.
Did you flip?
Yeah.
Would not, those didn't match up either. So as Lenten progresses and we reflect inwardly and grow toward, and we wanted to do this installments so that people could take in some pieces. You won't see them the same way each day when you come in, hopefully. They won't say the same thing to you. And then we added a second wall, and then we added.
And before you flip, And may I again?
Sure.
So on Monday, after we had worked on Saturday, and I'm just gonna say that if you've ever exhibited art, you know how this goes, and you can have moments where you put something up and there's you're just like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And it can be a rough way to start. And so unfortunately, the not ever pieces were really getting to you. And so I drove back up on Monday and we came in with a plan that we were going to take these two down, the two textile pieces.
Oh,
And
they drove me nuts.
Yep. And so we had a plan and then we got here, and I think maybe a friend had given us some feedback, but then I pointed out to Sheryl, like, look at what's happening in the conversation with the shadow here with your pieces.
And when I was able to shift my focus from my preconceived decision about those pieces to the whole conversation of what was on the wall, then I had to admit it was right. And that's part of that opening up, being obedient to. Now, this is different than obedience. Being obedient is a choice. It's showing up and putting aside whatever preconceived idea of an end is going to be, and that's not easy for somebody who's been in business for a long time. And that's how it works. You have goals. This is how you measure success. And so this process has been very difficult for me to let that go and not try to control it. And not easy.
Speaking of process, could you say a word about the process that you're using to create your textiles?
Yeah, these, it's a process called discharge dyeing. There's no dyeing involved. It's more DIEING because you're applying an agent. I use bleach and it takes the color out. And depending on, I use mostly black, depending on what fabric you use, the underlayer is revealed and it's different colors. How long that agent is left to stay there.
Dancing, it's like dancing.
Yeah, okay, go. Not going.
There.
Yeah.
Yeah, that.
And you can't really control it. If you look away, it's bleached out more than you wanted it to. And sometimes it's like, rats. And you put it in the bleach stop so it doesn't continue, and you rinse it out and you iron it and you look at it and like, and then you turn it over to the other side, and that's the image you were supposed to have. So it's been this turnaround, this 180 on lots of things for me, to try different fabrics, different, this one, I just sort of traced the wrinkles in the fabric. And I thought, okay, I actually like that. And so you have to honor the materials, the space, what, and something, the kenosis, if I can empty myself of, you know, my expectations, that's when creativity happens. So, yeah,
Okay. So just a little backstory, and it feels like there's been a lifetime of chapters since we met, and which created this foundation of trust and camaraderie that I think has facilitated, created that envelope for this work and the exhibition to come together. So right at the start of the pandemic, with, you know, I mean, the world was on fire, and I'm very open about this because I try to do a lot of self-advocacy, but I have a really profound panic disorder diagnosis, and so that was just crushing in a way. But I was staying at my parents' trying to stabilize my stuff, and there's a lot to that, so we're not going to unpack it right now. But I woke up one day and I was like, you know what, Doug, you are an expert in fear. Like you know how to do this because you've been dealing with this. You got all these skills. So, and you're an introvert. So let's just give yourself something, assign yourself something, and just start doing it. So George Rowe, if we may,
You have to stop your sharing.
sorry, Cheryl.
okay, I don't know how you stop this, but
Whose work we had at United in the past. We had a little row show many years ago.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
leave, stop share. There we go.
So George Rowe is a French expressionist, and this is not from the series I'm going to reference, but this is at the MIA, and everyone should see this piece and stand in front of it. And I had in one of Wilson's classes, I had written about this particular painting. Anyway, he's probably one of my favorite artists, mostly because of how I feel like artists, Van Gogh, and that they're using their art to see and make sense and understand the world around them. And I thought, well, let's try to engage in a dialogue if you can, just by, you know, what books you have on him and reading each morning. And I get up at like 4:30 in the morning. It's my favorite time of the day. And I would start by reading a little bit from whatever, you know, book I had. And then he started a series of work, Misere, about the time, a little before the World War I. And then it evolved and continued through that period. And the world was on fire. So I'm like, well, here's a perfect example, role model for me to try to find my way through this tumult, which, you know, very similar, but different. And so I set up a goal that each day I would get up and I would make a cross, just make a cross like that, like just a prayer, do a prayer, not so much in, you know, what people would think traditionally of prayer, but the prayer of doing, the prayer of creating, which I feel like when I go into that space, I understand and require, like, demand my ego to, like, okay, let's take a step back and now let's listen. So Sheryl helped me edit this down, and I'm going to hopefully find it. Darn, I don't have it. wait. Can we go to our artist statements? Do you have those?
Yeah, let me just,
So I would start with this prayer, and I live like 3 miles from the Mankato Makerspace, which is where I'm a member, which allows me to do my art. Never knew that was in Mankato. And I felt like this chapters that I alluded to, God was setting the path in front of me to get me to Mankato. And I never would have been able to have seen where I was headed when I was in Minneapolis. Like I really had to go through all that awful to get to that path. So, I'm looking for my prayer that we had written.
oh, that's,
Shoot.
okay, hold on.
Sorry.
Um.
Do you have ours? There we go. Thank you. So, may my heart be open this day for the flow where I accept the hand of art, God, and obediently follow. So that's how this has just evolved. And I started out when I resumed the series, and I'm just going to put a little note in here. There's some family dynamic stuff that happened that when I first started the series that blew it all, disrupted it, because we had talked about an exhibit then. That was 2019. Fast forward to recently, and we've somehow this reemerged. So again, I kind of was feeling like I just needed to do centering, that the world is going to be what it is, and I have to trust that that will work out and focus where I have the most ability to maintain my center for obvious reasons, because it's, it's how I stay healthy. So now I'm going to throw another thing in here at you. I have been obsessed by the movie Conclave. And I am one of those persons that I watch movies over and over and over, and I just study them. I don't know what it is, but it's like a soothing thing to watch a movie straight through and just be absorbed by it. And Dean Lawrence, he talks about in his homily, and he says something about our faith is a living thing. Our faith is a living thing precisely because it walks hand in hand with doubt. If there is only certainty, and sorry, I'm going to backtrack. He talks about certainty being the great enemy of diversity and variety and what makes the church strong. And so if there was only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery and therefore no need for faith. And I might, with faith or to be obedient. And I expand the idea that McNichols is presenting with obedient to that. This has always been my lifelong understanding of being an artist, is that creative spark was put there intentionally, and I have been tasked to be the steward of that it's not of my ego, that it's of creation of God. So that may sound a little woo-woo for people, but and that's how I've always approached the creative artistic part of my life, which has been my entire life. And I will say that every time I've gone through big, heavy, difficult periods, art always saves me. So but it's not, but I'm talking art and God and faith in my religious spiritual life. That is like one, it's not, it's all together, which is what brought me to United, because I heard about this program. So can we go to that one, that's my baby that I haven't been able to leave here up until
Sure.
last night?
Let me see if I can locate it quickly.
Yes, so, oh, you have to share we have to switch screens now.
Oh.
How do we do that?
Oh,
You know where it is? It's at the bottom of your screen. All the things to share with an arrow.
I think you have to be in Zoom.
Yep, in Zoom.
sorry,
Oh,
I'm
that's okay.
technically challenged.
Can you
Sheryl,
go back to Zoom?
so I put pin button. Yeah.
Aha.
Aha. I don't know if you have to select it again. Select, a few, I guess, if you're planning to go back.
Oh, I'll just talk about that one. Mainly, I want to talk about it because there it is. Yep. Because it has the. Yeah, there we go. It has that ribbon of metal that's twisted around. Stamped in it is my prayer. And what happened, the prayer, the version that I read to you, is what evolved over several weeks, because I would go down and I work, say the prayer, work, and then I'd come back, sit down, write. And at that time in the morning, I have access to the space 24/7, but nobody else is up at that time. They're all younger people, and they don't have to have dinner by 7 or 6, 5, whatever, but anyway, so it's quiet, and I love the quiet. So I would write, and the prayer just started, like I use these stamp sets to punch into the metal. You have to whack it really hard on an anvil. Not quiet. But talk about getting some energy going. And as I go along, things happen. You only get one shot. You can't backspace with it, because you can't like undo. So sometimes the letter gets turned or whatever. And so I just decided that no, I'm just gonna leave this and work with what is happening, because that is being obedient. If I'm truly following, I'm not getting in the driver's seat or the driverless car and trying to take over driving, because the point is to be led. So things that would happen in trying to stamp the prayer out, and it's in a few of the one other cross maybe, then it would change the prayer that we'd written and edited down, and it just evolved to what it is. And the biggest change is accept the hand of art and obediently follow that active, like, yes, I'm ready to be led, goosebumps. And I think that kind of sums up what I need to say, because I'd like people to be able to have their time.
There's one other phrase that I came across, Catherine Keller calls it persistent attunement. And if it's persistent, it's just there, it niggles at you. And so, yeah.
And if I may, yesterday, our wonderful president, Molly, amazing president, you're just crushing it, came by, and we had a quick conversation, and she mentioned this quote: attention is the only faculty that gives us access to God. And that is by Simone Weil. And I was just like, and she, I mean, of course, Molly just right on the spot gets it. And I just think that's so powerful, because only with an attention and intention can we be obedient.
Ready for questions?
Yeah.
Sure. I think there's a.
Thanks for sharing. Some of this is amazing stuff, and I have lots of questions. But what comes to mind, I mean, this language of obedience, I've been thinking a lot about this. This has been a theme within theology for a long time, this idea of obedience to Christ, discipleship as obedience. Of course, in the wake of, the World War II, there were German thinkers that were really calling that into question, that language of obedience, blind obedience in particular, right, to authority, to Christ. And
Right.
think of like Dorothy Zerla challenged this idea, but she also kind of came within this tradition of commitment to being obedient to, discipleship, I'd say. So I have drawn to this thinking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and actually the way that you talk about your whole process is very similar to how Bonhoeffer speaks of discipleship. It's a pathway. There, he's against sort of the programmatic. I mean, his whole understanding of formation is actually in opposition to having expectations and goals and an outcome predetermined in advance. And said obedience is obedience, on a pathway, and it's obedience in truth. And from his earliest work, even in Act and Being, his second dissertation, his habilitation shrift, was on this question of kind of the activity of grace. Is it? He made a distinction between the actus directus, which is a direct action of God's grace that moves us into action, that moves us toward discipleship, and the actus reflexus, which he takes to be often what theology gets caught up in, which is the reflective, the reflective eye, that sort of the ego that you're talking about, Doug, that sort of inserts itself, which he thinks actually is theology. And so in this way, theology is bad for Bonhoeffer, or it's a problem. Theology gets in the way, actually, of discipleship, because it's too cut up in the eye. Whereas discipleship is this, he's always after the, what is it? And so he writes, Discipleship, the book, wrongly named Cost of Deception in English, but it's called Discipleship. And the whole thing, or the beginning, especially if you read, that he goes through sort of how Jesus called disciples. And his point as he goes through these stories of Jesus calling disciples in the Gospels is that people just dropped their nets and left and followed. There was no the reflexive eye, the actus reflexus, the theological, in a again, bracketing here our love for theology, right? It's precisely our love for theology that gets us kind of caught up in this. Well, you're not following, though. You're just reflecting on it. And so I'm wondering about, there's some questions here around the language of obedience. Can we recover it? I'm very drawn to it personally, but I understand Dorothy Zerla, and I would think Catherine Keller is writing in the wake of that same tradition, who's saying, oh, we're not going to use obedience language, we're going to use persistent attunement language, because obedience language carries this
A lot of baggage.
a lot of baggage. At the same time, I'm very drawn to what you're saying in terms of the obedience to truth, the obedience that's not within me, but that I'm listening to, right? The idea of listening to the other, to draw me. And I guess I'm thinking about this too within the context of times we're living in. But there's a lot of reflexive kind of, I don't know if that's really the right way. Oh, a lot of doubting. When sometimes we're called to act, and to do so without that, do that just as
And
Theologically, I mean,
risk of faith.
I think Alex said it in his the Lydia thing. He's theological by nature, and I tend to sort of relate to that. And that's great. And you come with these theological, revelations, and they just stay there. They don't work if there's not praxis. I mean, it's great to think about them, but they have to go elsewhere. They have to be given away in some way. And I think that's why we thought people might bristle at the word obedience. So we used obedient because that's the quote. And obedience feels like a set of rules and you can't go outside the lines, but being obedient to what's drawing you to that theological precept for the revelation, that's different.
It's following.
It's
Yeah,
it's showing up
Yeah.
But is
and
there?
responding
And
to
being
what,
open.
yeah.
Yeah, because, and just thinking, and then just my last word here on the discipleship stuff is that, the German title for the book is Nachfolge, which just means following after, like literally.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess I'm wondering, is there following here?
And I might say that, well, Sheryl and I, as we were putting the work up, and I've done, like I referenced the pig and Chuck thing, and that felt like a collective being led in making of art. That element was there. And I felt like together, I felt this bond in that we both knew and understood and felt that we were being led. And it was communal, the two of us. So that has been, it's been exhausting.
It has.
I mean, it's just been not, I don't mean that in a negative way, but I feel like the most powerful art, the best art, is when you put all yourself in it. And that's when you get to feeling vulnerable, because then it goes up, or put it on an exhibition, you're just like, oh, what? And you just kind of want to go defensive, just like try to rock or whatever. But
Peg and Chuck was the first exhibition that he and I worked together on. And they paint, but they both paint on the same painting, layer over layer over layer, and neither ego gets the better of the painting, and the message emerges. And we were recalling that last night, that working together, that first exhibition has sort of now come for us in this exhibition. So
it seems like you're giving in the obedience theme, you're giving some agency to the material with which you're working.
yes.
I have a potter friend. When things get kind of resistant on the wheel, who will say, what is it that you want to be?
yes,
Because
yes.
it's not emerging as he had thought. And I thought, oh my, there's a real movement between the artist and the constructive agent.
It's funny that you share that. Not funny, but I mean, I'm very appropriate, because during my arts practicum, and it was a different time for the practicum, and I had, ambitious, and I was doing a ton of work, and I was working with canvases, and one night I'm asleep, and this one little canvas that I was planning to do, do the same sort of thing, just like out in the middle of the night, just woke me up and said, I want to be a painting. I was like, what the heck? So I got up, went downstairs to the studio, went in, and I looked at it, and I'm like, huh, well, I guess you'll be a painting. And I went back to bed, and the next morning it became a painting, and part of the, what I put up for the practicum. And I get hesitant to share that because it sounds like, in some circles you'd be, oh, he's schizophrenic now. No, it's not that. It's the actively paying attention, being obedient to the material. Now with the metal, it would not seem that has that possibility, because metal is really tough. And did I already say I started by breaking some of the crosses apart that started back at the pandemic? And I just selected some and I just took the sledgehammer and I just busted them up.
Do you have video of that?
Pardon?
You make video?
No, I didn't.
We
And I-
both wish we had
Yeah,
done some of the process with it.
And so then from those pieces, I started back working with them. And so I would say the piece on the far end, the ones that are deep and a little bit bigger than the others, if you look to those are some of the ones that were started out as one cross, got broken apart, and now are what they are. And I'm really curious, I didn't get there in this in this exhibit or these pieces, but I'm curious. There's a friend of ours, and I'm not going to share their name but they are identified trans, and I started a conversation with them, and I was kind of wanting to talk about what the cross and the trans experience, like I kind of wanted some insight to that, just because of how much our community, trans community, is being attacked and under threat. And they sent me this paper that a trans person had written, and I think it was on Luther. And the paper was writing about what's behind the cross is as important as what's in the cross. So I'm like, how do I get to the behind the cross in my next work?
And so if you look for the shadows. What do the shadows say?
Yeah.
And if there's a piece that doesn't sit well for some reason with you, why doesn't it sit well? What is it about it that just doesn't? And let that roll around in your head a little bit. Maybe it will reveal something. But coming back to the mystics, we had a hard time with the fact of, these women would prostrate themselves willingly and put themselves through this hardship for what? And it was for that communion, that metaphysical crossing of reality and existence. And of course, now I'm into quantum theology, but because they needed to share what the messages, the music that they got, and they were obedient. And it took me a bit to get it, but I think I do now.
The question, I have two questions. First one for Doug and then one for both of you. And I think it tags on to what you were just saying about the cross and behind the cross. I guess curious about some of the crosses you've made have a ribbon or a stone or stone-like shape or a particular thing embedded or on or held by the cross. Some don't necessarily seem to have that. I've done a practicum in the last couple of years, much smaller crosses, making rosaries, but thinking about what is a cross versus what's a crucifix, what is representing the divine on the piece, and looking at the ribbons, there's part of me wondering if this is a crucifix or if this is because there's something almost pinned to the cross, or represented
Right.
about the divine. So I'm curious what your relationship is to cross and crucifix, and particularly in the context of this work.
That's a big question and a very good one, and thank you. One of the things I'll say right off the start from the ribbons is that has been present in my work going back in a lot of stuff. And usually it is about spirit, because it's movement, being moved, and trying to bring to a very hard static material, metal, to give it something, some life. And so by sometimes, and you're right, sometimes I don't include the ribbon. Could we pull up the cross that I really struggled with that you got me to put up? Sorry. And when I started the series, it was just about going out and creating, getting one done, and then kind of reflect, and then the next day do another, and the next day do another. And my family, we say that in our family, you always move your rocks if you move. And I have rocks in my apartment. I have stones from all over the United States. And I have some stored back where I have things stored in Iowa. So they naturally find their way in. This one that I'm gonna reference.
Which one is it?
It's the one that's tilted. Oh, wait.
This one?
No, it's the tilted one that looks like it's shoot. It's on the gray wall.
It's on the gray wall.
It's this
This
down.
one?
Yes. I think. No,
Nope.
sorry. Let's see if I can pull up. I'll just use my phone to try to get there. Hold it up. I know this is gonna be really hard to see, but so on this one, it's the second from the end. Anyway, that bottom cross, I've been hiding it back from Sheryl, and and I think maybe what I felt like it is too heavy-handed, because literally the stone looks like Christ on the cross, crucifixion in action. And I also like it a lot, but it's that struggle between, that I was working and I was like, well, let's put a stone here and see what happens. And I did, and then I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. Let's weld some things around so it looks like a crown of thorns. And I just did it. And I guess maybe it's not heavy-handed, but the most interesting thing is that Sheryl saw it, and she's like, well, we're putting it up because you made me put up, put the never ever pile. So guess what? So I did. And today when I was trying to get it to hang with the system, and it just, like the physics, like this one up here would go wonky when I would try to adjust this. And I finally just said, okay, it's gonna hang at an angle. And I think it's more powerful that way. So, and I don't think I'm fully answering your question, like, what is my relationship to the crucifixion or cross? I would say, this is gonna maybe not make sense, but because I never really envisioned myself making crosses. It's just like I didn't see that for myself. But I had this experience of repairing one of yes, and because it had fallen and it was damaged, and in doing that, and I'm not exaggerating here, I felt like I interacted with his spirit, and that in that piece, it led me and guided me to the making the repairs. And I was like, wow, well, that's really strong. And again, when I was really trying to find a center when the world was on fire, it's like, well, you know, let's start here and see where it goes. So that.
And then my question for both of you is, how did the art pieces change when you saw each other's work? Was there, I guess, what was the sort of collaborative relationship, the effect of that collaborative relationship on the pieces themselves, a little more detailed? Like looking at it, and I don't know if that's what happened. I'm like, these lines look like direct representations of these lines, or mirroring or things like that, but I don't know if that's actually how they came to be.
The pieces were created separately, and I just brought mine and he just brought his, and we were led to certain pieces and we could see the conversation, the lyricism, the connection, and they were not the ones we chose to put together didn't work.
We also would share snapshots back and forth when we have our phone conversations.
But when it came to putting them on the wall, we knew that we had to let the work dictate who it was to be next to. And it wasn't a conscious, oh, this one has it, and it was not, that's the way I usually do, you know, when I hang exhibitions. I think about that conversation and the things that are in common, but we didn't in this particular one. It's been an experience.
I would say that when we hung this first grouping and that experience of when we were debating taking down those two pieces, that almost was kind of like, here, give me your hand, both of you, and this is how it's gonna go.
Yeah.
And then that gray wall, that was just, none of the pieces that are up there were the ones I thought were gonna go up.
Yeah, me either.
and it happened.
Yeah. For this first wall with the no, not evers, I sent a photo to a friend and I said, I don't know about these two pieces. They really bugged me. And they wrote back and said, but there's this, you know, conversation, this connection. Can't you see that? And I said, no, I can't, because I was so focused on my preconceived idea of the quality of those two pieces. And I thought, what hubris that your decision is the only decision. And then somebody came through and sent me a text and said, they really speak to me. Well,
and we would put pieces, like even here, we would put one of the crosses down and a piece that we thought would go with it, and they would just reject each other. You know, just be like, no, it just wasn't gonna work. And then we'd kind of look for, okay, well, let's wrong again.
Yeah, and but I'm very been a very spiritual thing, hanging this as well as making the art, the conversations that we had along the way. And when, you know, oh, listen to this, or listen to this. And in the middle, I was, very soon before we started hanging, went to the bookstore with a friend and I got a book, Saint of the Day. Now, Catholicism is not my formation, but I thought, I'd like to learn about the saints. And the one for that day was about Joseph. And because he was open and willing, shared in God's holiness. And I thought, okay, I think I'm getting it. Maybe I have to be hit over the head. But it was because I was in that place where, what next? I was in angst. And it's just, you can share in the holiness. And so, yeah.
And if I may, so I've exhibited quite a bit, and I gotta tell you, Miss Sheryl here has just knocked it out of the park, and what it demanded was not, it's really something. So I would just like to say, please just recognize what, because our work is together, it's just really something. And that's only because of how you stuck with it and you kept going and going. And I just admire that so much. So I just want everybody to really recognize that, my friend. And I'm hoping that, because she said a few times, I'm never doing this again. I'm never doing this again.
You should know better by now, Sheryl.
I know.
It's a guarantee.
And I can't promise I'll never ask again.
Well, I'm mindful of our time. This is like really great conversation. It's so wonderful to hear more about your process. And there's something happening next week.
Yes, we're having a low-key reception.
Week from today.
Tomorrow. A week from tomorrow on Wednesday, 4 to 7. So come before rush hour, come after rush hour here. At the seminary, and park in the north parking lot and come down the hallway. And
You mean the south?
South parking lot.
South parking lot. Well, okay, yeah, backwards. And everyone is welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for the turnout. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for your support.
Yeah.